The rain came down in steady sheets that evening as Daniel guided his old pickup into the small parking lot of Rosie's Diner, a cozy little place he often visited with his 8-year-old daughter, Emma, after soccer practice. The neon sign buzzed faintly, reflecting off the wet pavement, and Emma, still in her cleats, skipped beside him with a grin, chattering about her team's game. Inside, the diner smelled of fresh coffee and frying bacon, its booths half filled with weary travelers and locals winding down from their day. A young waitress with a tired smile approached their table, balancing menus in one hand, and Daniel noticed the faint name tag pinned crookedly on her apron, Lily. She seemed polite, her voice gentle, but something about the way she kept glancing over her shoulder told a different story. When a customer at the counter raised his voice over a mistaken order, Daniel saw Lily stiffen instantly, her hand jerking so sharply she almost dropped her notepad. It wasn't the flinch of annoyance, it was the reflex of someone who lived braced for blows, visible or invisible. Emma, always quick to notice emotions others missed, leaned toward her father and whispered, "Daddy, why does she look scared?" Daniel gave a reassuring smile, telling her softly that sometimes people carry heavy worries, though in truth his chest tightened because he recognized that look. He had seen it in friends long ago who'd endured things no one should. As Lily took their order, Daniel deliberately spoke with kindness, his tone calm, steady, giving her space to breathe. Emma, in her innocent honesty, told Lily that she had the prettiest smile, which made the young woman's eyes shine with tears. She quickly blinked away before excusing herself to fetch their drinks. Daniel watched her retreat, a weight settling in his chest, his instincts whispering that her fear was not temporary but deeply rooted. He tried to focus on Emma's chatter about syrup and pancakes, but his gaze kept flickering to Lily as she worked, moving quickly yet always with that edge of tension. Something in Daniel shifted then, he couldn't explain it, but he knew he wasn't going to ignore what he had seen. If Lily needed someone to notice, he had already decided he would. As the rain continued to drum against the diner windows, Daniel found his attention fixed more on Lily than on his own steaming plate of pancakes, every small movement she made pulling at his instincts. She was efficient in her work, weaving between tables with practiced skill, yet her eyes darted nervously every time the bell above the door jingled as a new customer entered, like she was bracing for someone to appear. At one point, when a tall man in a leather jacket walked in, Daniel noticed the color drain from her face. Her hands shook so violently as she carried a tray that one glass slipped, crashing against the counter, shattering into pieces. The manager hurried to clean it up, murmuring something about accidents, but Daniel saw the truth in Lily's pale features. This wasn't about clumsiness, this was fear. When she bent to pick up the shards, he caught sight of a dark bruise peeking out from under her sleeve before she quickly tugged the fabric down, hiding it as if ashamed. His heart sank. He had seen marks like that before during his years in construction, when co-workers quietly confessed about troubles at home they couldn't escape. Emma, sensing her father's unease, leaned against him and whispered, "Daddy, she's sad." Daniel kissed the top of her head, murmuring that some people go through hard things, but silently he promised himself he wouldn't let this go unnoticed. When Lily returned with the check, Daniel's eyes softened as he looked at her, his voice low but steady. "If you ever need someone to listen, or a safe place for just a moment, you can count on us." Her hand froze on the table, eyes widening in surprise, almost as if no one had ever offered her kindness before. For a fleeting second, Daniel thought she might speak, but her lips pressed into a tight line as she glanced toward the tall man in the corner booth who was staring at her with a sharp, possessive glare. Without a word, she hurried away, her shoulders hunched like she was carrying a weight too heavy for her frame. Daniel's jaw clenched as he watched, his protective instincts stirring. He didn't know who that man was or what hold he had over Lily, but he knew one thing for certain: if she needed someone to step in, he was ready. The diner had settled into a quiet lull when the tension snapped like a taut string. The tall man in the leather jacket suddenly slammed his coffee cup down on the counter, his voice booming across the room, calling out Lily with a harshness that made everyone pause mid-bite. "Late again, worthless as always," he sneered, his tone dripping with venom, and Lily froze mid-step, her shoulders curling inward as though she were trying to make herself invisible. Daniel, watching from his booth, felt Emma clutch his sleeve tightly, her small voice trembling as she whispered, "Daddy, he's scaring her." That was the moment Daniel knew he couldn't remain just an observer. He rose slowly, his frame steady and unhurried, and walked toward the counter where the man sat like a storm cloud ready to burst. The other patrons exchanged nervous glances but no one moved, the silence heavy as Daniel positioned himself between Lily and the man. "She's working," Daniel said evenly, his voice calm but carrying a quiet strength, "and you don't get to talk to her like that." The man turned, his lip curling in a mocking sneer. "Who the hell are you?" "Her hero," he spat, and before Daniel could reply, he reached out, seizing Lily's wrist with a grip that made her yelp softly. That sound tore through Daniel like a knife. Without hesitation, his hand shot out, clamping firmly onto the man's arm with controlled strength, not enough to escalate into violence but enough to make it clear he wasn't backing down. "Let her go," Daniel said in a low, steady voice that carried more weight than a shout ever could. The man tried to jerk free, his arrogance faltering under the unflinching calm in Daniel's eyes, but he quickly realized this was no idle warning. Slowly, reluctantly, he released Lily's wrist, shoving back his chair as he stood, muttering curses under his breath. For a moment, the entire diner seemed frozen, watching as the man stormed toward the door, slamming it so hard the bell jangled violently above his head. Lily stood trembling, her breath ragged, her eyes wide with disbelief that someone had actually stepped in. Daniel exhaled slowly, then turned to her with gentleness in his tone. "You don't deserve that. No one does." And before Lily could find the words, Emma slipped out of their booth and wrapped her arms tightly around Lily's waist, whispering softly, "We'll keep you safe." The diner buzzed in hushed whispers after the man stormed out, customers exchanging glances as though they had witnessed something both frightening and remarkable, but all Daniel could focus on was the young waitress standing before him, trembling yet freer than she had been moments before. Lily pressed her wrist gently, the faint redness from the man's grip still visible, and her eyes brimmed with tears she fought to hold back. The manager hurried over, apologizing profusely, but Daniel shook his head, his attention fixed only on Lily. "You're safe now," he said quietly, his voice steady, the same way he spoke to Emma whenever she woke from nightmares, and the reassurance seemed to steady Lily's breathing. Emma, still hugging her tightly, looked up at her and said, "You can sit with us if you want. Daddy makes everything better." That innocent statement drew a soft, broken laugh from Lily, the sound carrying more gratitude than words could express. Moments later, the police were called, the manager admitting he had seen signs of trouble but hadn't known how to intervene, and Daniel stayed by Lily's side the entire time, offering quiet support as she gave her statement, his calm presence anchoring her through the fear. When the officers assured her the man would face consequences and that she would not have to face him alone, Lily's shoulders eased as though a great weight had finally been lifted. Turning to Daniel, her voice wavered as she whispered, "I don't even know how to thank you. No one has ever stood up for me before." Daniel gave her a small, steady smile, his tone gentle but firm. "You don't need to thank me. Just remember you deserve respect, always." Tears slipped down her cheeks as she nodded, the truth of his words finally sinking in. From that night on, Lily began to rebuild her life, supported not only by her co-workers but also by Daniel and Emma, who made the diner more than just a place to eat. It became a space of safety, warmth, and healing. Emma insisted on sitting in Lily's section every visit, drawing her pictures and making her laugh until her smile no longer trembled. For Daniel, it had started as just another meal with his daughter, but it ended as a reminder of how one choice, one act of courage, could change the course of someone's life. And for Lily, it marked the beginning of a chapter where she no longer felt invisible, because someone had finally noticed and cared enough to stand beside her.